Well, welcome to church, everyone. Kind of a drippy day outside. Glad you could make it today. This is a kind of a special day in the year of the church. If you didn't know, this is the end of a season. We're just about to begin another season. Things are changing right on this Sunday. This is almost a Sunday of change because we're about to start going into a season called Lent. And we're leaving the season called Epiphany. And every year the church reads this scripture on this Sunday because it's the Sunday of change from one to another. Just as it is in the story of Jesus' life. In the Gospel of Mark, this reading is the turning point in the whole story. The first part of the Gospel of Mark, chapters 1 through 9, they're all about how Jesus is being manifest to the people, how his ministry is exciting to the people. And he's making some enemies along the way, but most of you hear stories of how successful he is and how welcoming they are about his healings, his teachings, his preaching. There's conflict, but nothing like what's going to come. And so, in preparation, getting ready for going to Jerusalem to die and to suffer, this story is told here. Because the apostles and those three guys who go up on the mountain, Peter, James, and John, they have to be prepared for what's about to happen. Their teacher, their leader, their friend, is going to get in more and more trouble from here on out. And so, it's important for them to know and to believe and to really trust that this is the one they want to follow. This is the one who is the beloved Son. This is the one who is full of light. This is the one who connects with Moses and Elijah on top of the mountain. This is the one they're going to put their weight behind. This is the one they are going to go with. Because from here on out, you hear more and more trouble, more and more conflict, more and more suffering. But up on top of the mountain, things are very good, right? On top of the mountain, they experience the voice from above. They experience the presence of God in a cloud. They see Jesus really from the inside out, as it were, full of light. This is the one who is connected to God. They know that from the person who he is. They believe that by his teaching, by his acts with spirits, by his healing, by his authority and his preaching. But this is a great manifestation of who he is. So, on the way down the mountain, well, first of all, they try to hold on to what they have. They said, Peter says, shouldn't we build 3 little places to stay up here? Shouldn't we build 3 little shelters? So one for Jesus, one for Elijah, one for Moses, and we'll all stay up here. And it does say he didn't really know what to say because he was really afraid. But nevertheless, they don't build anything because they can't stay on top of the mountain. You don't stay in the cloud, and you don't hear the voice ringing in your ear, and you don't see Jesus enlightened as he was all the time. You have to come down the mountain and go through your regular life again. There's a great book title, by the way, and it goes something like this: After enlightenment, then the laundry. No matter what happens in your spiritual life, you end up doing the laundry again just like you did before. And you always wonder, I remember wondering as a child or a younger person, I said, we're all so excited at the Christmas Eve service. We light the candles at the end of the service. We sing Silent Night. It seems so peaceful and calm. Why can't we do this like every Sunday? And why can't my life feel as good as it does on Christmas Eve at midnight when we had the candles out and we're singing Silent Night and we're all in communion, we're all excited about Jesus and it's all good. But somehow you don't get to stay on the mountaintop for very long. After Christmas Eve comes Christmas Day. You unwrap the presents and all the excitement. Oh, well, I got the presents, we're done. And you know, the church is really smart in a way. They know how this works, that you can't stay up on the highs forever. And so you know what day they put after Christmas Day, on the 26th of December? The day that's celebrated after the birth of Jesus, which is all joy and happiness. The day after Christmas, we remember the first martyr. It's St. Stephen's Day. Right after the birth of the Holy One comes the death of the one who dies for the baby, or for Jesus. So the church is trying to tell you, gosh, you can't stay at Christmas Eve forever. Everybody has places and times in their life when they feel this is it, I wish we could just stay here. Sort of like the honeymoon, I guess. Honeymoons don't really last forever. And so some people love Camp Capers. That's a church camp if you're not familiar with it. And they sing the songs at camp, and the children love camp, and they love all the traditions, and they go there for a week, and they always say, the kids always say at the end of the week, this is the real world. Why can't we just live this all the time? This is the real world. And then they go back to their school and to their friends and they go, this is not like camp. So whether it's Christmas Eve services or Easter services or your honeymoon after your wedding or Camp Capers, you can't really build 3 booths and stay there forever. You got to come down the mountain with the other 3 disciples and do the laundry and go back to your regular life again. It's not that you're not changed. It's not that you don't do the laundry in a different way or the different presents, but it's still real life again. And I wonder if we could think for a few minutes, how is it that we can be on top of the mountain and live life in the valley at the same time? How do you go back to regular life? Because, you know, in the life of Jesus, this is going to be hard times. And I wonder how, when you go through the hard times, can you hold on to what you believe about Jesus, believe about yourself, believe about the world? How can you go through the hardest times and still remember who you are as a disciple and a follower of Jesus? Because the hard times are definitely going to come. This is especially true when it comes to grief and when you lose something and there's a hole left in your life because you just lost something. And you're walking, like Psalm 23 says, you're walking through the valley where death is above you and you see the shadow of death everywhere. Like death is stalking you from behind. How do you remember the mountaintop when you're in the middle of the valley? Because you got to come down the mountain. And just to make this not just a theoretical sermon about seasons of the church year and moving into Lent, which is the hard times, I wanted to try and be as practical as I could by simply saying maybe one idea, one suggestion, one bit of advice about how to do that. How to have your faith and still walk through the hard time of Lent, or however you want to categorize it, the hard time of suffering, which Jesus is going to face just like everybody else. How would you do that? I would suggest just one thing, and you could probably write books on this, but just one thing is this. The only way to stay in remembrance of who you are and who is Christ and your discipleship when you're going through the valley, when you're off the mountain, when you're not at Camp Capers anymore, and it's not Christmas Eve, and it's not Easter Sunday, it's just another day of the week. One way to do that is to make time very, very short. Make the day that you're trying to remember Jesus and remember who you are very, very small. That you don't have to do this forever. How are you going to make it through? Well, don't look at the end. Just look at the next moment, or the next breath, or the next hour, or the next meal. Keep things very tight, because you can't really do it in the long run. You can't say, I'm going to make this like Christmas Eve for the whole year. Probably not. You'd be lucky to keep Christmas Eve in your heart on the way home from the church, which is the whole point, right? Just between here and there, let's just stay in remembrance. Let's just stay present to God. Let's just remember Jesus on the mountain and us as disciples for just a short period of time. Because looking at the long run, boy, it's almost like when you make your New Year's resolutions and you say, I'm going to go to the gym every day for the next 365 days, a whole year. Or I'm going to, and you do that for about 3 days until you think, no, I don't really want to do that today. But if you did it just one day at a time, right? So, I don't know about the whole year. I'm just going to do this just for today. Well, then you're able to maintain some kind of balance a little bit. And you can get through that small length of time in the presence of God, remembering who you are, remembering your discipleship, just for that short period of time. I don't know about a whole year, but I can do one day. And those of you who've gone through the hard times of grief, like I mentioned before, where you're missing something or someone, and you think, how am I going to get through this? And you have no idea how you're going to get through all this. And nobody else really does either. Except to say, you can do this big thing one little tiny piece at a time. You can get through this hard grief, which seems like it'll go on forever, just by trying to get through the next hour or get to the next day, get to the end of the day. And then you say, I made it through one day. That's all you have to do. Get through that little period. Forget about trying to get all the way to the end. Just remember God, remember who you are, remember your discipleship, your commitments. Remember the mountaintop and do it for just a short time, a short length of time. Sometimes I think that's why in the church we do these things called praying the hours. If you look in don't look now because you have to listen to me. But if you want to go to the prayer book, there'll be a little system there for praying 4 or 5 times a day. And it's not because God needs to hear from you 5 times in a day. God's not interested in real. I'm not saying he's disinterested, but he doesn't need you to pray 5 times a day. The deal is you need to remember God 5 times a day. So if I can just make it to the next prayer time without losing my mind and stay present and stay focused and stay aware for that short length of time between now and lunchtime, well, there you go. You've made it. That's how I think big things get done. You ever wonder how those guys at NASA, how do they get somebody on the moon? So we could never do that. But they said, well, let's just do this one piece at a time. So one problem at a time. The same thing, how did they get that go-kart, that little machine up to Mars? And run around in the Mars dust. They said, well, we could never get on Mars. I said, well, we can't do the whole thing today. We're not going to get there today, but if we do one thing at a time, we'll get there. And how did they get that little rocket to land on the moving comet? You know, NASA's done that? How they intercepted a comet, I have no idea. And if you say, well, tomorrow, let's launch something and get it on the comet so we can go see what comets are like. So nobody could do that. Only if you do a little piece at a time. Do this, do this, do this, and look what's happened. They made it. They made it there. When I look back at my own times in my own life when things were hard, and it could be emotional things, like for me, there's mostly emotional stuff, whether it's death in my family or divorce. You said, I will never make it through to the end. I will never make this. I'm done. People told me, they said, well, why don't you just make it through this day? So I don't know if I can even do that. But just remember who you are, who God is. Remember who you're following in Jesus. Just for a little bit and start over tomorrow. But don't try to do the whole thing at once, because if you look at the whole thing, almost impossible. Well, it really is impossible. You know, marathon runners, you ever see, I learned what those little stickers on the back of the car mean when it says 26.1 or something. What's the marathon? 26.1? By the way, I got really clever, or other people have done this. They started putting other numbers on the back. You know, on the back of my car it says 89.1. Yeah, it's an FM radio station. I didn't run 89 miles. I just listened to that radio station. Nevertheless, those marathon guys, they can't visualize running 26 miles and say when they start the thing out, well, let's just envision crossing the finish line. It's like, there's no way. Let's just make it much smaller. Let's try to get to the next station, maybe get the next step, and stay right here. The people who try to imagine the end at the beginning, they never make it. They give up. There's no way. You get to mile 10 or mile 15, and yeah, only 10 more miles to go. They go, yeah, great. So they look really small. They keep things really contained. Because nobody could think that far ahead. Because the whole thing, no matter what it is you're thinking about, it's too big. How is Jesus himself going to make it from the mountaintop through the crucifixion? How are the disciples going to come down the mountain and watch their leader suffer and die? How are they going to get through that? They can't. They're just going to go one step at a time. And just for the day, just for the moment, they say, let's be a disciple, let's be a follower, let's be a Christian, let's do our discipleship just for now. The end is too far off. Who knows what's going to happen between now and then? Let's just do this for today. That famous line, which is almost a cliche, you know, how does a person take a 1,000-mile journey? You know, one step. The only thing that's important right now is the next step. That's why the 12-step people are always talking about just for today. I can't think about being sober for the next 50 years. God only knows what's going to happen in 50 years. And I have no control over half of that. But when I'm walking through the valley of the shadow of death, when I'm coming down the mountain, and it's not Easter anymore, and it's not Christmas Eve, and it's not Camp Capers, all I can do is really get that next step down. I can remember the presence of God and be a disciple and be a follower in this next step. And that'll be good enough. And that'll take us all a long, long way. So you're about to begin the journey of Lent. You're about to enter the time of suffering and the hard parts of the Christian year. It's not Christmas anymore, Christmas Eve, or not Easter. This is Lent we're getting to next week. And you might be in a part of your life where life is hard and life is mostly struggle. And you think, how am I ever going to get out of this? How will I finish this? But just like those disciples had to come down from the mountain and leave the glory of God on top of the mountain, they could remember the glory just one step at a time. Just one day at a time. And then you might get through. Easter is coming. Easter's coming, but it's a long way off. And there's a lot of hardship in between here and Easter. But we'll make it together, just one step at a time. I offer this to you in God's name, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.